Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the idea of nations and states. Basically, we got to understand that when we're dealing with scarcity, our end goal is happiness. It's increased individual and societal welfare, wealth, satisfaction. We care about wealth because countries that are wealthier are usually happier, they're more satisfied, they're healthier, they have their citizens getting better outcomes. Now, to deal with scarcity and to try to get these outcomes, you have a political system that needs to deal with an economic system. We looked at the economic systems already, all the way from laissez faire to socialism, and the incentives that are provided when dealing with these economic systems. But now we're getting into how do you create a political system that deals with these economic systems and actually makes them function correctly. How do we get the capacity of government to be used to meet people's needs and wants through distributing resources in different manners? So this is where we're getting into the concept of nations versus states. So the first thing we got to learn when we're getting into the government portion is what exactly is a state. And a state, it has a very specific definition. One, a state must have a group of people with defined borders and a government and sovereignty. This is what a state is. It's a group of people within defined borders with a government and sovereignty. And sovereignty is the absolute power within your own borders, that you have the ability, if you are a group of people, to have that power within the defined borders of your country. If you have these four things, then you in fact have a state. And another word for a state in a geographic sense is a country. Okay. So let's look at these four things. Number one, when you're having a state, you need territory. Above all else, you need a space, a piece of land. These borders are set, everybody respects them, that kind of thing. It is your land, your territory. And people often get into this idea that people own land or an ethnic group owns land. No, that doesn't really work like that. I mean, you can have specific ethnic groups that own land, but really it's institutions that own land. A state is the one that owns the land. You need people, obviously, so you need to have population. And that group of people is going to be governed by some set of institutions that make and enforce public policy. So government is the institutions that actually make and enforce public policy. These are like laws and regulations and actions. So if you're at like, what is government? Oh, government is like just people that do things. No, it's actually the institutions within that state that make and enforce public policy, laws, regulations, and actions. Sovereignty is the absolute power within your own borders. It's basically that other places around the world acknowledge that you actually exist. It doesn't matter if you say, I'm a state. If everybody else is like, no, you're not. You're a little dinky place that thinks they're a country. You're adorable. I think I'm going to take you over. All right. No. A state actually, what makes a state a state? Territory, people, government, and the idea that everybody else actually believes you're a state and treats you like such. All right. Now, within your own country, you can lose that sovereignty, that power, and we'll be looking at that more as we go along. Now, governments need to be able to do three things to function. Number one, they must be able to execute power, and that is the ability to rule. All right. This is changing people's behavior. Number two, you need to have authority. You need to have the right to rule. You need to be able to point to something and say, that gives me the right to be here and to be in charge. And finally, and the most important one is legitimacy, that the people have to believe that the government actually has the right to rule. If a government does not have legitimacy, the government starts to fall apart. The people rise up, start to act out against the government, and that can erode the government's ability to have absolute power within your own borders. Okay. Who ultimately, by the way, deals with the concept of sovereignty? Who makes sure the country is protected? That's the military. The military's job is in a proper democratic country. The military's job is not to enforce policy on its population. The military's job is to protect the country, the state, from other actors out there. So when you see the military engaging in actions within a country, that's usually, the military is to protect us from enemies. The military is used within the country. What it's saying is that the citizens are the enemy, and that's not what you want in a stable state. So then what is a nation? Well, a nation is really easy. It's simply a group of people connected by common features. That might be race, it might be language, it might be religion or ethnicity or political identity or some kind of aspirations that everybody commonly has. But a nation, by its definition, is not a difficult term. It is a group of people connected by common features. So, for instance, what is the United States? Is it a state? Yes, it has all the four functions of a state. Is the United States a nation? Well, yes, it actually is a nation. People commonly call themselves as Americans. We have a similar identity, a similar heritage that we are, in fact, Americans. So we are actually both a nation and a state. We also have many nations within that state. For instance, this is actually a an actual real nation. This is the Navajo Nation. It is on the Four Corners region of Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. They call themselves the Navajo Nation. What do they have in common? They are all part of the Navajo tribe from that region. You've probably heard Pomo Nation and even sports teams like Raider Nation. Okay, what do they all have in common? They're all losers. Now, probably one of the most common examples of nations and states is this one. And so let's talk about the nations that actually exist within the AP6 states. This is the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom is actually made up of four very distinct states. One is England, one is Wales, one is Scotland, the other is Northern Ireland. So there are really four states that exist four nations that exist within that state. England is the dominant one. That's the one that kind of, in some cases, took everybody else over. But there are, like, culturally, ethnically, the Welsh, the Scottish, and the Northern Irish, or Irish, depending on which side you're on, have different cultures, different ideas. So these four nations exist within the United Kingdom. In Russia, people often think of Russia, and what you're thinking about is the Slavic or Eastern European Muscovites. And the reality is there's all kinds of nations that exist within in this state. Okay. But the only ones I really want you to know are down here. This is in southern Russia. This is in a region called Chechnya, or the Caucasus region. The Caucasus are the region. They include regions like Chechnya and Dagestan and North Ossetia. Now, these are ethnically different people. A lot of them are religiously more Muslim. So that nation of an ethnically more Chechen people, they don't really see themselves as Russian. They are Muslim, so they don't see themselves as ethnically Russian Orthodox Christian. So these group of little territories over here, North Ossetia, Chechnya, Dagestan, they are much more of their own national identity and not the identity of being Russian. Okay. China, 95% of China is Han Chinese as an ethnic group. There are two that I'm going to point out that are outliers. Two nations that are very deliberate. One is Tibet, which was taken over by Mao Zedong in the 1950s. Tibetans are very much believe they are a region that has been taken over by China and they should be an independent state. Okay. The other one is Xinjiang. This is in the northwest corner of the country. There are ethnically Muslim Uyghurs. They are being prosecuted heavily by the Chinese government, forced labor, forced sterilization, essentially internment camps, that kind of thing. So these are the two nations I really want you to know, besides the Han Chinese and the rest of the country, the Tibetans and the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Iran has Persians. They have all kinds of different little ethnic groups. Primarily, they are Persian, but one that we're going to be really focused on, especially here in 2026 with the war going on between the United States and Iran, is this little corner. This is the Kurds, or the Kurdish people. Kurdistan is a hidden nation. It doesn't have borders, but parts of Iraq and Turkey and Syria and Iran, what they have is essentially very Kurdish ethnic groups that are there. And the Kurds in the Iran government do not like each other at all. In fact, the United States, President Trump has kind of pushed the Kurds now with the start of the war here in March of 2026, have to kind of push against the government and try to rise up and overthrow the regime. Probably not going to happen because they're really not that powerful of a group. But that ethnic group, the Kurds, is something you should know about. Of course, in Nigeria, we have the primary tribes. We have the House of Fulani, we have the Yorubans, we have the Igbo and the Ijaw. Those are nations, definitive nations that exist within the state of Nigeria. And of course, more people in Nigeria see themselves as these ethnic nations than the actual state of Nigeria. Mexico has all kinds of different nations, but the main split is between kind of the mestizo Spanish indigenous mix that happened when the Spanish came over and conquered Mexico, and then a split between the indigenous people, the Mayans that existed here in Mexico. And the Mayans' main region is Chiapas, and Chiapas has a almost kind of they're autonomously run. They are not a state by any means, but the Mexican government kind of lets them do their own thing a lot, and that is because of their indigenous Mayan heritage. And so ethnically, that little nation of Chiapas, it's very poor, very agricultural, but also very ethnically like Mayan, big time. So another nation within the state of Mexico. So you have a difference here. Remember, a state needs borders, it needs people, it needs government, it needs sovereignty. And remember that nations are actually people that are sharing some kind of common interest or identity.